Hello. This episode of Kit Crashing is all about floating ecologies and the idea that ecology could be something that could float inside of our cities. And we're seeing this already in many major projects across the globe for places like New York and the High Line, or large green roof proposals, and huge urban greening and green corridor initiatives. And so naturally I thought, how do I do this with LandKit? And just as I was having that thought, I also was invited to give a lecture at Jefferson University, a very quick lecture, mind you, but I wanted to propose this idea as part of this panel that I was on with some esteemed architects. So anyways, that was really great, and I enjoyed meeting everyone. But the proposal was something that I'm happy I did in place of just talking about our work. I hope you enjoyed the demo we give on floating ecologies and massing greening into urban areas.
This is an interesting example of a set of ideas that came out of a talk that I gave at Jefferson University a few weeks ago with the Council for Tall Buildings, with one of the partners of Moshe Safdie, Jaron. What I wanted to talk about was how do landscapes populate large cities? And I started thinking about, how can we get decks of green flowing through the city in reasonable ways? And I wanted to spatialize that. And the thesis is that we need this, obviously, because we need better and more ambitious green in our cities. How does that work? And if we're going to go taller with buildings, how do we go taller with landscapes? And that may be the right idea or not, but I had this idea or vision of how we could use LandKit to expand and build in this way. And so this is actually a baked version of the site. So I have each element, this is the kind of the green deck, these kind of green bridges that come down, and then these sort of supporting buildings. We have our kind of garden of towers here that even in this case are kind of inside of the garden as kind of a conceptual idea. But this whole city was an imagined thing that I put together. So let me show you what we did with Grasshopper, and I'll begin to look at that. So if I swipe over here to the Grasshopper and I zoom out, believe it or not, this is the whole Grasshopper definition. So if I zoom in here, what do we have happening first? First, we start with the roads. I created a road network using a set of line work you can see here. And that's in no plot, I believe, under roads. So if I select all these, I created a road network. And that road network is, again, just imagined. But I was able to take those road networks and create pipes along them and intersect those with a plane. And if I preview that, we can see that there's a set of roads in the green there around the yellow that create a set of roads. And then I randomly shifted them up and down for collaging purposes, which I've actually integrated this into LandKit, and we don't need this anymore. But it, whenever roads are all at the same exact level, this is going to kind of sort of force the hand and make them at one level or the other. The other thing I did was to take a set of other geometries, and let me show this. So under areas, if I preview those, these are all the underlying surfaces. And if I'll just turn this off, If I select all of these, select sublayer objects, you can see that I have my big green moves, my big gray, and water, just as again a conceptual model. But then all of the roads layer in on top of that, and the roads, if you'll notice, they're at a 2, and so they're slightly higher than everything here. And then I think I had sidewalks as well. So ultimately what you end up seeing from that, and I can preview that. Let's actually just do a preview here. Preview. And I'm just going to preview these geometry surfaces and hide these areas. So you can see this is everything, and I'm going to turn off some of this. There we go. You can see the road network and the sidewalks all layered in on top of these other things, which is kind of interesting because all I need to do in order to change a road is, well, first of all, turn on that layer and simply move that layer over like this, and suddenly it updates the layout of everything, or of all these trims and everything. The cool thing is that all of those trims are happening, and then it's also projecting them to the topography. So if I go back here and I hide this or delete it, and then I go over here to show everything previewing, those topographies are areas are projected to the topography. Well, they're flat in terms of the terrain, and they don't have any thickness to them. But I do add thickness to these parts, the deck. So if I go in over here and I look at the bridge, so I create 2 topographies. I'm doing an existing topography, which is again all made up, and then a bridge topography. It looks like I patch in the bridge topography in the one instance and smooth that out. But then I use the bridge topography and the ground topography to then generate, wherever that is, to generate a thickened version of the, wow, I've got some wacky stuff happening here. There's a lot of weird stuff to preview here. Oh, there's the bridges. See them? Those are really just using the bridge topography and then shifting the bridge topography down 2 feet in order to create the top and bottom. This is going to be a lot like the dragon that we did in episode 1. And we could have any topography coming here at the bottom, but we're just doing it to create an offset. Now, an interesting thing that we do is to actually create another topographic layer for the tallest, for the buildings. We are going to create slabs for the buildings that go down to the base topography and up to this top topography. So this is a little strange, but we're thinking of the tops of these buildings as a kind of topography. So if I go over here and look at Topo, and I turn on the tallest Topo, we can see that I'm using a surface as my top topography to determine the height of those buildings. So if I turn that off, it's pretty cool. And then you can see the bridge topography is being defined by these orange lines, which are break lines, and then we smooth those out quite a bit using the smooth tool, which is right, where is it? It's right here. So we patch the bridge into the existing, and then we smooth it out in order to create the bridge topography. Preview that. So the bridge topography kind of floats up above the existing, but not all the way as high as the tops of the buildings. What else do we have here? So we're trying to tie, let me turn on some of my contours. Where did they go? Here they are. So I use the contours to cut through. The white ones are cutting through my existing grading on the ground, and then the pink contours are cutting through my bridge layer. So you can see how I've feathered the two topographies together by starting with the base topography and then patching this bridge in to the zone that I want. This is actually the boundary. If I go and plan, I've used this boundary as the boundary to define where I'm actually making topographic changes for the bridge. And you can see here that there's where the cutoff is. And then when I smooth it out, it does go a little beyond that boundary because the smoothing is not constrained by the boundary. And I have my funky shaped buildings here in plan. So the whole thing kind of looks like some sort of fish. Now, if I hide these again, it's actually kind of funny how few steps there are here. It's really the geometries that you have to set up and to sort of say, hey, okay, I'm thinking about this thing in a different way than just drawing a surface. Yes, we're drawing a surface for the tops of the buildings, and that's fairly straightforward. But whenever we get into the existing, we have a bunch of break lines that we use to define a topography for that base topography. I'm going to hide this road network. So here is just the break lines used for the ground, and then I have the bridge stuff kind of getting patched into that. And I forget what this blue, the blue is where I'm doing the smoothing. So you can adjust where smoothing is happening versus where break lines are getting patched in. So there's a number of layers, and you can always turn these things on and off. But for any given, kind of modification layer, you may want to sort of just look and have things coordinated. It's kind of an important thing. And so those are my three main topographic moves in order to get the tops of my buildings, the top of this deck that's floating there, and my base topography. Now, I'm going to show you one more thing, which is the support buildings. So if I preview those, the support buildings are all of these buildings here underneath my bridge. This is the thing that's going to support my green revolution here. I have three typologies whenever we preview here and show. Yeah, so there's the columns, there's these kind of glass buildings, and then there's these kind of core buildings, or maybe they're less glassy, a bit more operational, a bit more maybe even back of house kinds of buildings. Probably not at that kind of urban sort of center, but they just might be a different typology, and I wanted to show how we can show different typologies. Let me try the hiding view. Shaded preview. Okay, there we go. That's the normal operation. The last thing was a little flourish, which was to add in some paving and some green kind of patchwork. So if we turn this on, I can see I'm using the paving tools to get a bunch of solar panels on the roofs, and then them over here to get a bunch of kind of like landscape typologies. And again, this is all very conceptual, but I wanted to sort of show something a little bit more jazzy than just a bunch of solid massing. So the way that works is all of these areas come in, they come in from a group of layers called areas bridge, and they have different layer names here. And so then when they come in later on, I can say pull these areas by name. So if I look at all of these, they have different names: areas bridge GC mix, areas bridge GC, etc. And it's actually the mix one that I want. And so I use the name GC mix to pull out just those areas that I want. And then if I follow this thread over here, I like to hide some threads in order to kind of reduce the spaghetti. Over here, I am literally just pulling those areas out, or that, I guess it was just one area, and I begin to add paving to it. And I trim the pavers, and I apply a color mix using something that looks more landscapey than like paving. I take the color index that's coming out, and I give it I add mixed greens to it, and that way when it gets baked later, those will go into 3 layers called mixed greens 0, mixed greens 1, mixed greens 2. And you can see down here under baked, we have our mixed greens, right? So if I turn those on and off, those are there. Now I did a similar thing, almost exactly the same with these solar panels. So I pulled out the building tallest areas, and I paved those. I applied color, and then I projected those to that top mesh. And then all of these things that are getting exported, I basically took all of the geometries, all of the layer data, and all of the color data, and I added a baked name to all of the layer data, so that whatever the name of the area was, the layer that it's on, it's going to fall under baked, so that it doesn't land on these other layers, right? So under here I have all these layers organized, and a lot of these things. So I have my base areas, I have my bridge areas, I have my buildings, I have my support buildings, and then those solar panels, which it looks like I didn't bother to give them a prefix, so they're just on 0 and 1 layer, which is a little lazy. But for my example, in my lecture that I gave, it worked. And my streets and my sidewalks, which I labeled at one point independently of, because they weren't on the layers, they were being constructed computationally using the pipes and the intersections that I mentioned in the beginning. That's pretty much it. But the really fun thing about this whole thing is you can change stuff at any point. So if I hide this baked layer and I re-enable this preview, I can see the whole thing. If I go and I look at my support buildings, for example, and I zoom in here, I can just grab a curve and I can move this over here, and it literally just updated that building, the whole building connected to that thing. I could do this similar thing with my tallest buildings and move this over. It updates the building massing, but also the solar panels on the top. Yeah, so it's pretty nice because I can always change things later. Let me just turn on my contours again real quick, preview. And I can change grading. I changed the grading, and this is one place where I have it set up so that it's not automatically going to resolve everything. You sort of have to go to here, and I have a refresh topo button set up in order to refresh the topo. So you click that, it's going to refresh that and reproject everything, and it was that fast. So if I move this way up and just refresh again, just so you can see as a demonstration, boom, it's done. That is how the Grasshopper and how the whole setup worked. I think it was an interesting lecture. I was able to share some thoughts about how landscape integrates into a larger urban environment. I was able to test out how we can do massing using LandKit at an urban scale, which was not really something I had thought that much about before. And that includes buildings, and that includes these different layers. And finally, I got to test this out using a USDZ file that I exported from Rhino 8 and was able to look at on the Vision Pro. One thing I found that was similar to the Dragon demo that we did a couple weeks ago was to use metallic materials in order to really see that in that environment. And so I'm experimenting with those materials. They seem to work the best as a simple translation of apply and export, and not having to kind of apply too many different textures to overcomplicate things. Well, that's floating ecologies, and I hope you enjoyed. Again, as always, subscribe and continue to follow our adventures here on Kit Crashing.